Hello and welcome to The Long View, a podcast that takes a closer look at the games people play. Long View is a happy, fun member of Dice Tower Time super fun show. Really? I just want to see if anybody actually listens to this anymore, or whether they've gotten so used to me saying the same thing over and over that they just kind of tune it out. What is that now? Well, I kind of do pre-record it, but I record it for the guests on. Anyway, yeah, so this is The Long View, and we're part of the Dice Tower Network, and the Dice Tower Network has a lot of great sister podcasts that you should totally check out. I want to send a thank you out to them. The Long View is generously sponsored by GameSurplus.com. I've talked a lot about Game Surplus over the years just because they're so fantastic. I love their selection. I love their pricing. I love their care with my packages. But mostly, I love their service. Back when the store was owned by Thor, it was just an incredible amount of personal service. He cared so much for his customers and was always willing to try and find anything that I was looking for. And then when ownership transferred over to Velma and Amos, they never skipped a beat. It was exactly the same level of dedication, exactly the same level of care. And that same kind of personalized service. It's almost like a personal shopper for me. If I'm looking for something, I can shoot Velma an email, ask her if she can track something down for me, and almost before I know it, she's shot me an email back and said, hey, I found that it'll be coming in on the next shipment. And they're really just a great resource for gamers who are looking to kind of get those games early, those Essen kind of titles and titles that you can really only get over in Europe. She has shipments coming in all the time. And so I kind of look at them as sort of like a boutique sort of store that's bringing in imports, imports that I can't get over here easily, or games that I'm really intrigued about that I know are going to be, picked up by somebody later. But for right now, hey, I can write to her and try and get a copy of Neue Heimat. And sure enough, I was able to get one. If I'm looking for a Hospital Connect, I can get that. No matter what it is that you're looking for, if you shoot them an email, they will track it down for you. And, when they get it for you, they're going to give you that premium service, but not at a premium cost. And I think that's another really important distinction for them. We all know that there are other stores and other websites that will bring in, especially after the big shows like Essen, they'll import, some titles, and it is expensive. It is not easy, but then they'll charge you kind of accordingly. You'll be looking at $80, $90, $100, $120 for a game or a title that's come over just so that you can kind of check it out before everybody else and kind of be the person that's there and can kind of get a first look at it and really have that excitement of trying something new. When you order things from Game Surplus, you don't really seem to ever get that surcharge kind of a feeling. Everything is very fair. Everything's very reasonable, super low prices, and just great service. So check out GameSurplus.com the next time you're looking to put in an order or the next time you're looking to find something unusual. And if you do, please be sure to tell them the Long View sent you. I also want to send a shout out to my local game store, the Gamer's Edge in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. They are a growing resource in the area for gamers, whether you're a video gamer, board gamer, a collectible card game enthusiast. They've got everything there for you. One of the best things about the place, aside from the owner and the friendly staff, is you have just a huge amount of space. So there's always room for going in there and setting up a game and meeting up with some friends. And it's right there on Main Street in Stroudsburg. There's lots of other great little stores you can stop by. So the next time you're in the area, stop by the Gamer's Edge on Main Street in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, conveniently located off of Interstate 80. My name is Jeff Gamble. I'm the host of The Long View, and today I am very proud to be joined by another first-time contributor. I am on a roll here. I am thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to Derek Davis, who has been waiting patiently to talk about one of his favorite games, Navajo Wars, which is going to be the subject of our discussion tonight. So, Derek, hello, and welcome, and thanks for being on the show.
I'm glad to be here, Jeff. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem at all. It's my pleasure entirely. And so we're really kind of interested in talking with you about this. We actually had been working for quite some time, just as by way of a little bit of background, to have a 3 kind of person episode. We were going to have Travis on, and you and myself talking about this game. And it just seemed like no matter what we did, first it was my schedule that was terrible. And then I think you had something going on for 1 week we were trying. And then the last few times that we've tried a few different dates back and forth. And finally Travis is like, look, I just don't think we're going to ever be able to get the stars aligned, unfortunately. He said, so, he's going to bow out. And so that gave us the opportunity to finally get this thing scheduled. And so as much as I miss having the opportunity to have all 3 of us have a chance to talk about this game, because it's such an intriguing title, I'm really happy that you were able to join me and willing to come mano a mano and talk about Navajo Wars. So first, what I'd like to do is just give you a chance to kind of introduce yourself, because you do some podcasting as well, so let's not be too modest. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your show, where people can find you, and some of the things that you're active in and the things that you're doing with the community here?
Absolutely. I contribute to the What Did You Play This Week podcast thing, which is an unruly name with an acronym that is also very difficult to remember. But
that's the first step in good marketing, right?
Yeah, exactly. The name's too long. Maybe the acronym works. Nope. Okay, well, let's just go with it then. I live in Kansas City, Missouri. I recently moved back here from Northern California, and I was kind of getting into Twitter, getting into the community a little bit more, and I found Brandon Kempf on Twitter and saw that he was from Missouri, and so we just started talking a little bit, noticed that he had his own podcast, and I just had this brain blast one day of, hey, here's an idea for a segment, and I pitched it to him, and he said, yeah, do it. And so I've been doing that now for 20 straight episodes. It's a weekly podcast. So basically what my segment is I play one game for 10 straight weeks, and I evolve through the review. It's called an evolving review, and I just give my thoughts on the different things that occur to me as I continue to play this game, not quantity, but for quality. So I'm not trying to jam in a bunch of plays as fast as I can. I'm trying to stretch it out and see what the experience is like as I play it over a longer period of time. So that's kind of the gist of the segment. I'm also starting a series, hopefully the Dice Tower will continue to air it, on solo gaming. So I had my first segment a couple weeks ago, and the next 2 should be dropping here in the next couple episodes. So that's what I've been up to.
Well, thank you very much for letting people know about the podcast and for what it is that you've been doing. I did actually hear your segment on the Dice Tower. I was listening to that. I think it was last week, and so that was kind of fun to get to hear that, because solo gaming is something that a lot of people are very passionate and interested in, and it's one of those things that I think is particularly really, really helpful at certain times in your life. There are some people who absolutely just love solo board gaming all the time, exclusively, and then there are people like myself who kind of would solo game more as like a thing of necessity, and then kind of left that and was fortunate enough to find people who I could play games with on a regular basis, starting with my wife and then having that group grow. And then I kind of like would occasionally drift back to solo gaming, when there were kind of interests that I had that others in my group didn't have. And so for me, kind of solo gaming kind of waxes and wanes, but it is something that I know that there's a lot of people out there who are interested in. And so I think that segment that you're talking about is something that's going to be useful to a lot of people. You have a lot of different podcasts out there. Give a shout out to the Low Player Count podcast. There's the One Player podcast. I think that from time to time I've heard some of their episodes. And so you're another voice kind of talking about these kinds of ideas and topics on the the Dice Tower, which I think is great. And then your format for your reviews is really fascinating because it kind of actually fits the theme of this show as well. This idea of kind of taking a more careful, kind of longer view, a more studied approach to a game. So I love that idea about that sort of, after each play, what kind of occurs to you, what new thoughts pop into your head. So I would encourage people to go and check that out because if you like the long view, I think you're going to find a good match there in your podcast. So thanks for sharing all of that for people out there who might not have been aware of what you were doing.
Yeah, thanks. And I would say that you are definitely an inspiration in some of that. So I appreciate what you do as well.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's very nice of you to say. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about you, let's talk a little bit about Navajo Wars. So this is a game designed by Joel Toppin. This was published by GMT Games, and this game came out in 2013. This game is one that kind of came out on GMT's kind of P500 list, and it kind of immediately caught my attention. As soon as I saw it, I was interested because I'm interested in anything to do with Native American history. And so when I saw it and then I kind of dug into it, I was really intrigued because it was going to be, it looked to me, telling this kind of story in history from much more the Native perspective rather than the typical kind of almost colonialism sort of expansionist kind of perspective. And so right away I was kind of intrigued. And then as I followed the game on sort of P500 and then I started seeing like the board art and seeing, the kind of the card driven aspect of it, these were all things that were just kind of like sending off little like check boxes in my head, like, yep, like that. Yep, that looks great. Yep, I love that.
Yep.
And so I ordered it. I P500 it and was really happy when it came. GMT has gone from being sort of this small kind of like war game only kind of grognard kind of publisher to become this kind of giant. I mean, they put out just beautiful products, and their games are really kind of spanning so many different kinds of topics and areas of interest. And so I was really thrilled when I opened up that box, and then I tried to read the rule book and I failed miserably. And then I went through the playbook and I actually went through the walkthrough scenario kind of in there to try to kind of wrap my mind around this game because there was so much going on that was so very different. And so what I recognized immediately were two things. Number one, it was hitting all of those marks that I anticipated it was going to hit, which of course is important because a lot of times if you have certain expectations or anticipations and they're not met, you're kind of disappointed, okay? Mm-hmm. But then number two, I was even more intrigued once I actually started playing it when I realized how deep the game went. This was not a game about military conquest or things like that. It was not like a straight game like that. It was more about culture. It was more about trying to preserve these people's way of life in the face of this sort of relentless onslaught of pressure that you knew was never going to end. It was almost like kind of like telling me this story of like how long can the Navajo hold on? Like how long can they hold out? How long can they resist kind of having their own sort of internal decisions affected by what's going on in the world outside them. And so the generational aspect of it. And so I was like totally wrapped up in this game and really just enjoyed it. So that's kind of my backstory with the game. How about yours? What was it that got you interested in it?
Yeah, very similar at the end, but very different at the beginning for me. I got into gaming and quickly found that I did not have a play group that was going to be consistent for me. And so I started dabbling just in some solo games like Onirim and, very simple stuff like that, Pandemic, and so on. And I found that I enjoyed that, but I didn't really know how to engage in it very well, and it was just kind of getting my feet wet. And then I was listening to your podcast, and you dropped this game just in passing. You mentioned it. And I thought, that sounds really interesting. I'm not much of a history buff. I'm not much of a historical war gamer at all. In fact,
Right.
I think this is the first GMT game I purchased.
Okay.
So I just thought, you know what? I think this is an intriguing idea. And so I kind of had this schedule where I would read a lot of novels. And so I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop reading for now. And this is going to be my novel. This is going to be the book that I'm reading, quote unquote. And so I picked it up, and I knew it was just going to be an uphill battle to really learn how to play it. But I just invested my time and thought, I got to get into this. I've got to try it. And so, as you said, pick up the rule book and you fail miserably. I quickly found Joel's instructional videos that went along with his playbook. And so I just set it up, and what would happen is I'd come home from work. We had just moved to Missouri. I'd come home from work. We'd get our son to bed, and I would just sit in a room by myself for 2 hours going through this video and trying to track all the different moves and what Joel was doing to introduce the game and all the different decisions you could make. And I quickly realized that, okay, I'm really going to have to invest a lot of my intellect in this so that I can get the best experience. And that honestly is what made me love this game so much. I found myself very rarely caring about the win condition. The only thing I cared about was that I could continue to play the game. So, those victory point checks throughout, you kind of go, okay, as long as I can get those and keep playing the game, I don't care. Oh, I suffered a minor defeat. Oh, well, that was amazing. That's
right,
when I experienced that the first few times I played it, I knew this was a game that is going to stay in my collection as long as I can keep it. Even if I only get to play it 1 or 2 times a year, it's worth it for me. It's just one of those things where it's like, you know what I need to do today? I need to go play Navajo Wars, and I may not do it again for 8 months, but I need to do it today. And so that's really what made it stick in my collection for me.
Well, thanks for sharing that perspective, because it's interesting, because like you said, we came at it from 2 totally different sort of mindsets, as far as like one, being really interested in the history, and you not really originally being so interested in that. And so, you would come home, there in Missouri, you'd sit down in that room and you would look at those videos with Joel and say, Joel, show me. Right?
Yep, absolutely.
You see what I did there? The show me state. You see that?
Yep, very nicely
done. That's good
done.
stuff right there. And that joke will get me banned from Missouri. Anyway, yeah.
It would probably make you a hero.
Anyway, yeah, no, I mean, I didn't see those videos either because I was too stupid to look for them, or maybe they weren't there originally. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I kind of slogged through that playbook, and that was like really helpful. But I think the videos, and especially if Joel did them, himself, I think that would have been fascinating. So they're still there. Yes.
Yeah, and he walks through every single move that he has in the playbook. They're great. And really the reason I found them is because I'm so addicted to watch it played. I always go and look to see if he has an instructional video, because if he has one, I might as well watch that while I'm reading the rules, right? And so obviously I knew he wasn't going to have one for Navajo Wars, but I just looked for a tutorial, and that's what popped up. And so it was really, really helpful in learning the game.
That's great advice for people who are, looking to learn the game, because it's a very dense game, and it is a game that will engage you in ways that I'm not used to being engaged. Like you said, I tend to be kind of competitive. I'm not super competitive, but I like to win, and I try to win, and I'm happy when I win, and sometimes I'm a little grr if, things don't necessarily fall my way. And so, but this game really, like you said, it's not really about the winning. It's not really about that. It's about that story that unfolds as you play the game, and as you kind of see, like, just like you said, can I keep playing? Do we get to keep going? Do I get to see more? What's going to happen next? What's going to happen? Oh, that fort just popped up there. It's like, oh man, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to deal with it? And so, over time, you just end up kind of getting really wrapped up in the game. and wrapped up in the story that it's telling. So what I'm curious about, one of the questions I want to ask you is, with all of this, did this get you interested in any way? Like, did you start to dig in or creep around a little bit and check out some of the history? Did it drive you in that direction? Or was the game that outlet for you entirely in and of itself?
No, it definitely drove me into it. I didn't get quite into the literature, just did some searching around. You know, every time you flip a card and it references some historical character, I go, oh, who is that? Like Kit Carson. Go and kind of learn a little bit about him. What's this guy up to? What's the situation, the historical situation? But what really engaged me in the game itself was feeling like I was put in the place, like you said, of the Navajo people, the Dene as they're called in the game, and trying to experience what this was like for them from their perspective. I think this is the first game that I really played that made me realize that literature, novels and so on, aren't the only outlet of creativity to help us understand what the world looks like from a minority's perspective. That there are actually ways that you can incorporate that into games. And that to me just kind of blew my mind and made me think I need to look for more games like this and encourage people to keep making games like this, because it really did change my perspective on this subject, and of course for the Navajo people in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. It did the same, for me, and I'm really looking forward to the next one in the series, which is going to be dealing with the Comanche, and that one is going to be coming out relatively soon. I think I've P500'd that one as well. There are games, and this is, I think, a growing movement that you're sort of talking about, this idea of games being a medium to give people an opportunity to learn about something and challenging you to learn about something. And we've talked about this on the podcast before with other guests at other times. You know, this notion, I remember when I talked with Brian Mayer. Now, he's the guy that did Freedom, the Underground Railroad. That is a game that will fully engage you and will immerse you sort of in an emotional way with the topic that you might not become invested in the same way just by reading. As you realize that these little tan cubes are people, and you're losing these people. You know, these people aren't going to make it. These people are going to be sacrificed so that I can get these people out of harm's way. And, these people that were almost home free are now straight back down in the Deep South in the market. And they're going to be re-entering the slavery system, that whole machine down there yet again, and it just evokes a reaction from you. I think some of the coin games do that extremely well too. You're looking at a situation, say in a game like Cuba Libre, and as you play the game, it really challenges you to think about things from the different perspectives. When you see the government's collusion with the casinos during that game, as the two players will kind of naturally sort of pair up from time to time, you can sort of begin to understand sort of the resentment that was building among the people who were having to live under that system, under those conditions. And so, I think you're right. There are games like this that kind of not only are fun to play and engaging to play and challenging, but they're also challenging you on other levels as well. So, before we go any further, Derek, would you mind just kind of, it's going to be a tall order, my friend. Would you mind kind of giving just a basic overview for people who maybe haven't had a chance to play of just kind of the main sort of ideas and systems in the game? Because there's really too much for anybody to be able to describe it all in an audio format. I really think you're absolutely right about that. You kind of almost need that video. You need to see a lot of stuff. But could you maybe give us a general overview?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of weave in and out of narrative and mechanics, I'm sure, but I'm going to try to stick as close to a narrative explanation as I can. and then just kind of take you on a tour maybe of the board. And so essentially what you're looking at in this game is you're trying to balance your culture and your military as the Navajo people, the Dene, in such a way that you are exceeding the morale and the ferocity of your opponent. So the opponent in this game is going to be the Spanish, the Mexican, and the American forces as you kind of move through about 200 years of history or so. And so as these people who are embedded in this place in the Southwest, namely the Canyon de Chelly, which is kind of the stronghold of the Navajo people in this game, you're trying to push back just enough to stay alive as long as you can against these forces that are encroaching on this territory that has been yours for as long as anyone knows, right? And so the way the game tries to help you through the mechanics is they've got this map, which looks like kind of like a animal skin, right, with stones placed out on it, as though you're looking at a strategic map of your tribal leader who's trying to show you the points that need to be kept in order to protect the holy land that is the Canyon de Chelly. And so you are pushing your families out to the borders of some of these places in order to keep the forces back. And the way that Joel designed this is that you have these boxes down at the bottom with different families, and you have a place for your male counters, your female, and your children, and they represent a family. And every time you get a set, you have a family that can function in the game, and you put them on the board, and they almost become like a tribe in and of themselves, that's out on the outskirt in these different areas. And part of the genius mechanics of the game, in my opinion, is that you need to keep them spread out because if you kind of think like Pandemic, you build a deck and there are certain cards in each section of the deck. So you split them up like into 5 different piles and kind of shuffle them up each, but keep the key cards in order that kind of progress the history or the story. And as you hit each of those cards, you're going to get victory point checks. And essentially the way you keep ahead of those is you stay in as many different territories as possible. And so that gives you certain amounts of victory points. Some are worth 2, some 3, some 4, etc. And so it really, it doesn't encourage you. It forces you to stay spread out in order to protect your land. And you kind of alluded to this, but what I love about that whole system is that it really forces you to admit the fact that you are just delaying the inevitable. You will not win. The game will allow you to win, but ultimately the forces are going to push on you so hard that you can no longer hold your territory with the military and culture that you possess. And so it really does, for me at least, create that tension, because I kind of want to just hole up and use the stronghold, but the game doesn't allow you to do that because history doesn't allow the Navajo to experience it that way. So I thought that was just a wonderful mechanic. So the way you're balancing your culture and your military is you are using your elders and their wisdom to kind of advance your military enough so that you can keep the morale of the enemy low. But every time you increase your military, you're decreasing your culture. You're losing something of who you are because you're responding to the need to fight against this new enemy, which once again to me is just such a wonderful storytelling mechanic. Every time I perform that action where I'm praying that my elders will be able to increase my military, at the same time I'm realizing, wow, I'm doing this at the cost of what we are as a people. So I love that mechanic of the game. So the whole trajectory then is you are trying to push back with this increased military and slowly decreasing culture. You're trying to advance forward and push the Spanish back, or the Mexican forces or the American forces back into Santa Fe, which is like right on the right border of the map.
Right.
And as you do this, you're gaining hopefully some goods by performing raids. But ultimately, what you're doing is you're poking the bear. You are just asking for these forces to begin to subjugate you, and so there are these cubes that you pull out. So every time you perform a raid, you're going to pull a cube out of a bag, and depending on the color, you're going to either maybe get a sheep or get a horse, or you're going to get a servant, or you're going to get a subjugation cube. And I don't know about you, but that was always, every time I drew one of those, I just,
it's the worst.
I just look up in the air and go, really? There's only
It's the worst,
there's three of them in there, and it seems like those are the first three cubes I draw.
They're
always,
no matter what you draw out of that bag, it's like it's always you just kind of look around, and then you empty the bag. Did you ever empty the bag?
Oh yeah,
just to make sure that, like, wait a minute, maybe I've got the wrong distribution in here or something. And so you empty the bag and you're like, surely there must be some mistake. No. And then you start like wondering, like, are these cubes a little bit larger? Did they cut them a little bigger? Is there some way that I'm like subconsciously always picking them? Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. It was like a devious way to like make the game move along or something.
Yeah.
Forcing me to always pick those cubes. So I definitely feel you there.
I'll have to ask Joel if he did that on purpose. But yeah, so you're pulling these cubes out, and it's kind of representing what's happening to these forces that are experiencing these raids, and they're getting angry, and they're just going to build up steam, and ultimately they're going to come back at you, and they're going to hit you pretty hard. And this is I've seen some criticism about this on BGG, which kind of confounds me, but this is to me the core genius of the game, and that is the AI, because we are talking about a solitaire game here, and if you don't have at least a decent AI, it's going to feel a lot like every other solitaire kind of puzzle game. And I'm not saying anything bad about Matt Leacock. I love Pandemic, I love Thunderbirds, which he just released as well, but they're a different kind of experience fundamentally, because the AI is really just a deck that you're flipping. So you have the deck that you're flipping in this game, but you also have these columns of actions that your enemy is just waiting to take against you. And every time you flip a card, they're going to get action points. And depending on how many they have, they're going to be able to execute these different orders going down the column. But if that was all it was, you would just say, oh, well, then you just have this set column, and you can just figure out, okay, in order to beat this column of orders, I can just do this, 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 and this. But every turn you're rolling dice and you're flipping the counters, or you're switching them from an active to from the passive to the active row, and so you can never really predict what your enemy is going to do. You can have a fairly good idea, but if you prepare too much for that one thing, it's going to come back and bite you, because you're going to roll something, it's going to flip, and you're going to say, oh, I prepared for this action, and now all of a sudden they're going to start building instead of attacking me. And so now I have, like you said, now I have forts in my territories, and I was just prepared for them to try to subjugate me. And so there's this constant decision-making process of, okay, how can I really prepare for what the enemy's about to do to me? And I know it seems really complicated, and if you look at the rules, it's going to take you a while to see the process, but there are really only 3 things you can do to prepare for all of this. And I think they're pretty simple. You're either going to let time pass. In other words, you're going to kind of wait it out and wait for new leaders to emerge. It's kind of the most complicated action in the game, but I think it's a really wonderfully thematic action that you can take. With the passage of time, your elders die, your families mature, and you get new families or tribes that you can put in different territories. And it's just a really fascinating mechanic. The other thing you can do is take actions, and it just lists a bunch of things you can do. You can plant corn, you can move, you can do X, Y, and Z. I won't describe all of them to you because we'd be here all night. And then what I really love is the first thing that he actually presents to you, which is the planning phase. And if you really delve deeply into the game, you'll realize that planning is the thing I think that Joel, as the designer, wants you to do most. Because if you read through all of the operations cards, which is the deck that you're kind of flipping through as you go, the only thing that you get a bonus reward for doing when is the planning phase. So if you execute a planning operation, then you get to do this extra thing. And so what you do in a planning operation is you go to your elders and you say, we need more military, or we need this, that, or the other thing. And there's a list of things that you can see once again in the rule book that I won't go over because, again, we'd be here forever. But the idea being that you're kind of consulting your elders, and they're attempting to affect this kind of change in your society so that you can better fight against these forces. So those are really the three major things that you're trying to do in the game to win. Quote unquote win, to succeed in staving off the forces that are trying to subjugate you.
Well, thanks for that overview, because that gave a lot of detail in a very kind of a clear and concise way. You did a much better job than I could have done, for sure. And there's so many little nuances to the game, like you mentioned corn. And boy, losing your cornfields can be absolutely devastating. You can lose those through any number of different terrible things. I also seem to remember in one of the games I played, horses. Yeah. Very, very important. Yeah. And sort of your herds. Your these kind of herds of horses that the people generally had, and so you've got all of these little elements that you're trying to kind of juggle. You're trying to keep yourself, as you said, populated, spread out, kind of just making sure that you never get kind of cornered, you don't get literally boxed in that canyon. But at the same time, you also have to understand there's going to be all these encroachments. And like you said, that sort of cultural loss through military ramp up, I think, is just an incredibly fascinating kind of component to the game. So I wanted to kind of circle back to that and sort of echo that, because there will be, it's like a necessary evil. You kind of have to do that at various stages of the game, and yet you can see that sort of cultural erosion almost. The Navajo were generally, historically, one of the more sort of peaceful groups of people. When you're looking at indigenous Native Americans. And so this idea that he captured of this sort of cultural erosion because of having to sort of respond militarily to these outside threats, outside cultures, outside influences, and what that does to you, those kinds of things, I think was just a really, really clever and unique and sort of fascinating way to deal with that subject matter. And so, it's really kind of got me anticipating, how's he going to handle the Comanche? Because the Comanche were a more aggressive kind of Native American group, right? And so, I'm going to be so curious to see how those two feel different. There are so many different cultures that could be explored using this kind of game system, with this sort of huge amount of historical information that we have, sad though it may be. it's just rife with possibilities of all of these different kinds of themes that could be explored. So I really did appreciate that about that design, that whole notion you're talking about of sometimes when you're doing the things you need to do to survive, it chips away at you. It chips away at those things that kind of made you who you were, which is the way you put it, which I really appreciate. So let's return back to the AI of the game, because that was one of the things that I kind of found to be a bit of a barrier for me. And so I was wondering if you had any advice for people in how to kind of handle that, because the flipping of the counters from one state to another and the movement of them was one of the things that took me the longest time to try to figure out. And there was part of it, I think, was what you already talked about, was the frustration I felt as a player, immersing myself in the role of the Dene, of not, I think I had it figured out and then I was totally wrong. And so dealing with those consequences was frustrating. But the AI I had a little bit of trouble with. So I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about the AI, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way it works mechanically is you have these little counters that are labeled from A to N. And so at the beginning of the game, you're going to remove 2 of them. And so whatever you have left, you're going to sort alphabetically, first in the active row and then in the passive row. So the right-hand row is active and the left-hand row is passive. And at the beginning of every enemy activation, you're going to roll 2 dice. And depending on the numbers you roll, so let's say you roll a 1 and a 6. So you would look at the counter in the column, the first one, number 1, and you'd say, does it have a red banner on it? If it does, you just leave it alone. But if it doesn't, then you flip it. So that was the first counter that's waiting to be activated. And if you think, okay, I know exactly what the enemy's going to do, they're going to do this, and then you roll a 1, everything can change if you have to flip that counter over, and then all of a sudden they're going to do something different. Part of kind of the cheating aspect of the game is that once you get to really know the counters, you know what's on the back of them as well. And so you can kind of prepare and make sure, okay, well, I know it says subjugate on one side, but it says build on the other. So I need to be prepared for both of those things. But the other piece is that if you roll doubles, so if I roll 2 1s, now the counter in the passive row is going to move over to the active row and switch places. So now there are 3 possibilities that I have to be aware of. What I like about that is it really does kind of simulate, to me anyways, a brain, mainly because all the actions of the opposing forces are pretty good. And so it's not like they're making weird random decisions. They're all good decisions. It's just a matter of you trying to figure out which one they're going to make, and you can never really be sure. And so that's how you kind of sort out what action's going to take place. But then the other variable that comes in is on the card that's kind of governing the turn. So like I said, with Pandemic, you flip a card and obey its rules, right? In this game as well, you're going to flip a card and it's going to tell you how many action points the enemy gets. So let's say they get 4 action points, and then you go to activate that first counter. If it says 5 on it, you don't have to activate it because they don't have enough action points to execute it. But if it has any number between 1 and 4, and sometimes it might even say 1, 2, 4, you have to spend as many of those action points as you can to perform as many of those particular actions on that chit. And so you're kind of looking at the action points and trying to think, okay, I know that they're not going to do anything this turn because the value on that chit is way too high. So I'm going to get essentially a free turn without them taking an action, as long as I don't roll a number that makes it flip, right? And so there are some of those things that you have to consider as well that I really like. But you can also find yourself in a situation where they've built up 10 or 11 action points, and they're going to trigger like 3 of these things right in a row. And they're really just going to pound on you. And so for every turn of reprieve that you get then you're going to get beat down the next turn. So I really enjoy that mechanic.
Well, thanks for giving more detail about that, because that was one of the things that I really struggled with. The flipping of the counters, the swapping of the counters in particular, it seems like I messed that up all the time. Like when I remember early on making the mistake of when I moved from passive to active, I flipped it. I don't know why I did that, but I thought somewhere in the rules it told me I was supposed to flip it. And that just, it just messed with my head a little bit. I'd kind of gotten used to the sort of flowchart kind of AI systems that I'd seen in Volko Ruhnke's games. And this one, for some reason, maybe because it was just a little more graphically abstract, and not as much of a flowchart as what I was used to looking at when considering a sort of complex AI like the one you're describing. It just really gave me fits. It took me quite a while to kind of figure it out, between trying to kind of digest the rules and see how it works. But as you said, as you start to learn those chits, and then you kind of have some foresight, some idea about what might be coming, but then you have those nasty surprises. And I really like the way you described as well that sort of waiting for the hammer to fall, as those action points keep building. Because there's times when you're like, oh, thank goodness, nothing's going to happen to me this turn because, they don't have enough action points for this. But after a while, what's going to come. And so I was always kind of like curious, like thinking back at the games that I played of it, like wondering, like, would it have been better to take several small punches than to take the big hit? And I never could answer that. That was something that I liked about the game. It couldn't be mathed out, which I think goes back to what you were talking about with the sort of puzzle aspect of some solitaire games. This is not that. Like there's too much going on for you to ever kind of be able to math out necessarily all of the different things that could happen and the implications of those things. And so the game, to me, I always described as very fluid. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. And in response to the fiddliness and kind of trickiness of that AI, one thing that I did the first couple times I played is I just didn't even bother flipping or maneuvering them. I didn't roll the dice either. I just moved them in a pattern until I got used to all the different actions. And then after I got used to that, I kind of added that level of complexity on there. It doesn't recommend that in the rule book, but I found that to be helpful as well.
Well, that sounds like a good tip. Something that would have been helpful for me. Where were you? That's what I want to know.
I was waiting for you to tell me about the game.
Where were you in these videos that you speak of? Yeah. This was very much a summer game for me. This was when as a teacher, I have time in the summer. And so it was like, this was a summer game for me. This was a game that I would set up and leave on the table downstairs. And I would, as you said, I'd go in, I'd head down there and play for like an hour and then just leave it. And then come back to it the next day or 2 days later and just kind of pick up from where I was. And that's one of the things about the game that I really enjoyed. There are some games that I have attempted to play that way where they end up feeling very fragmented. If I walk away, come back, walk away, come back. But for some reason, I didn't really have that experience with this game. Did you find that to be true as well?
No, not at all. And that was actually very surprising to me because it feels like a game that would fall into that trap, just because of the very systematic way that you move through a turn. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Then it can feel like, oh wait, did I already do this or am I doing this now? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think what the game kind of forced me into was telling a story. Oh yeah, and then they built that fort and then I responded by doing this. And so I can kind of create that narrative in my mind. So when I come back, it's almost like I came back to a book that I had bookmarked and I just open it up and start reading again because I already know what happened in the previous part of the narrative. So.
Right. Yeah. And that's it's interesting because you've used that word narrative quite a lot in the description of the game and in your description of the gameplay and how to play the game. This sort of storytelling aspect of it. Are there any sorts of abstractions to the game that you were not fond of? In other words, like I kind of remember being a little bit sort of unsatisfied with some of the sort of conflict resolution in the game. It was a little more like I felt so nitty gritty. You know what I mean? Like I was down in the details with the family, with the elders, with decisions. Like I kind of felt like I was sitting in on these council meetings, and then there would be these sort of grand things that would happen on the board, and they would happen suddenly, and I would kind of feel like, wait a minute, it's almost like my perspective changed too rapidly for me, and that was like one of my only kind of complaints about the game. Like that kind of didn't sit right with me, and it was, I think, because of that feeling of immersion in the narrative of the people that I was really looking at and studying. Did you find that, or no?
Absolutely, yeah. Actually, that's my only negative point of this game, and it's primarily with the two tribes that you're fighting against. So there's the Utes, and I'm blanking on the other ones, but there are two rival tribes, and whenever they kind of pop up, you have to make this decision of, am I going to try to make peace with them, or am I going to go to war with them? Am I going to try to raid them and push them back as well? And I understand, obviously, from a historical perspective, why you would include that in the game. But I think that led then to what you were referring to, which is this very strange combat resolution whenever you would go to war with these rival tribes. And that, you're right, it pulled me out of the game completely in a lot of ways, until I finally kind of figured out that whole, if this happens, then you do this, but then if you do this, you do this, this, and this, and that whole flow chart that comes in the game. I remember once I finally kind of mastered the basic game, and then that happened, I pulled that out and went, oh my goodness, there's another thing I have to figure out now. And that really did. It took me a while, and like I said, I understand why it fits in the game, why it fits in the narrative of the game, but ultimately it was just something that I feel like could have been left out and the game would have been fine, and I don't really think it would have changed the feeling of the game, because the way it is, it does feel sometimes a little bit intrusive.
Yeah, and I keep wondering, like, if there would be a better way to deal with that, because a game that has that much historical research into it, I really think you can't leave it out. I mean, that might be one area where you and I disagree a little bit. You understand why it's there, but you wish it wasn't. I want it there. I just wish it meshed a little bit better with everything else going on. I mean, I think it's important from the game perspective that people understand that the Dene were not only, fighting against the sort of colonial powers of the time, but there was also conflict with other Native American people. And so I think it's important to kind of show that, because that whole kind of notion of Native Americans fighting other Native Americans, which you would think would be incongruous given the fact that there seems to be this very obvious common enemy, this very obvious common problem, and yet because of the pressure being put on everybody, it kind of forces people into other decisions or rash decisions or decisions that they might not normally have made. Not to make it sound like, all Native Americans before Europeans came were just sitting around and in a circle, a drum circle, and, having a wonderful time together all the time. There was always conflict. But I think that the arrival and the encroachment of European powers really kind of accelerated this and exacerbated it, and made them more likely to get into conflicts with each other. And so, I can't necessarily go and raid that Spanish mission, but I could probably go and raid, this village. And, that's something that I can do. And so maybe I will do that, and so all of these things I think are important parts of the story, but I just didn't really quite get or appreciate the way in which that was handled. And for the life of me, I can't exactly figure out how I would do it differently or better without adding a huge amount of bloat to the game systems, which are already pretty complex.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what Joel is probably struggling with as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things that's kind of like on the bucket list, the wish list of like, boy, if this game could be revisited. I know that some designers will at times go back and revisit earlier designs and will kind of re-implement things, kind of do a 2.0 version. I mean, I think of like Martin Wallace with the Study of Emerald. or I'm sorry, A Study in Emerald. The original kind of first edition is weird, quirky, wonderful Frankenstein of a game, and then he's like, okay, well, what if I tone it down just a little bit and make it just a little less weird and a little less quirky, and stream it, and you end up with the second edition, which a lot of people really are liking and enjoying. So I kind of like wonder if maybe sometime there might be some kind of tweak that he might add to this later. Other than that, I mean, I didn't really have very many negative reactions to the game in any way, shape, or form, other than the playtime. The playtime is the games that I played were quite long. Now they were stretched out over multiple sessions because it was a solitaire game, but it was definitely on the longer side of a lot of the games that I will play. So I was kind of curious, did the playtime have any effect? Because, I mean, it's listed as 120 minutes, but I never played this game in 2 hours. I don't know who played this thing in 2 hours, but it wasn't me. Did the playtime have any sort of effect on you? Did you ever, think that the game maybe was, maybe running a little longer? Did you wish it was a little more streamlined? Or were you happy with the way it was? And then as a follow-up question to that, does playtime matter in solitaire gaming in general?
Oh, those are great questions. So for me, I never thought about the playtime once, and this was also kind of a summer game for me. It's turned into more than that, but it started off as a summer game for me as well, where I would just leave it set up on a table and come back to it every day and take a couple turns, flip a couple cards, and move on. And so, like I said, because this game isn't really for me about winning something, it's more about the story that I'm getting out of it. And because it has these 6 scenarios, for me, it was like working through a storybook. What's going to happen this time? What's going to happen this time? And so, no, it is not 120 minutes, but it didn't bother me at all. And so moving then into, and this is really interesting, when I started working more into media and getting to the point where I had to play games more often and be efficient about the time I spent playing games, then it became an issue. Because I may want to play that game, but I can't leave it set up on my table now because I need to set up a different solitaire game so I can play that, so I can review it for a podcast, or so I can write something on it. There are just so many ways that board game media has kind of forced me to be a little bit more efficient and care about those things. So I think that's more why it feels like an issue to me now than it did before. And so in that same vein, I think as board game media people, time is always going to be an issue for us. But generally in solitaire games, I think that's one of the greatest benefits that they have, because it's just like a video game, except it takes way more physical space, right? I can engage in it, I can play it, I can get to the next level, and then I can fold it up, put it away. If you're playing something like Pathfinder, for instance, and then come back to it later and start from where I left off. And so I do think that in solitaire gaming in general, I would hope that it's really not that much of an issue for people, and they actually see it as one of the great benefits, is that this game may take me 16 hours to play, but it doesn't matter because I can just come back to it whenever I want to, and I don't have to get a big group of people together.
Yeah, that's definitely kind of mirrored my memories and experiences with solo gaming as well, which is I found that when I did do solo gaming, and I don't do a ton of it, but when I did it, there was a lot of time for study, And I'm not even necessarily talking about study like, looking things up on the internet or reading a book. And by the way, while we're talking about books, definitely check out Blood and Thunder. Really good book that is all about this particular time period. Really enjoyed reading that. But anyway, no, the kind of studying I'm talking about is just that kind of fun of just kind of going downstairs, standing in front of the table, and just looking at the board.
Yeah.
And just kind of considering it and thinking like, okay, all right, so what could I do now? What if I do this? And you kind of spin out all these different ideas and scenarios in your head. And this is why, like, one of the reasons why I always kind of thought, I had this like sneaking suspicion that maybe my wife would be a good solo gamer, because she's one of those people that will sometimes be accused of that analysis paralysis, of sitting and trying to kind of min-max things, or, really looking at things, considering things. I'm always kind of, exacerbated with her sometimes on a first play of a game, because I'm like, oh my God, don't try to win it. Just play it, Like,
Yep.
I don't care. Like, why are you trying to figure out how to master this thing 10 minutes into it? Like, just play it. I'm always saying to her, like, push the buttons, pull the levers, see what happens. And then the next time, you'll have an idea of what to do. But, like, that's just not in her nature. Like, she kind of feels like, well, it's not so much trying to win, it's trying to understand. And I want to understand what it is I'm supposed to be doing. And so I've often kind of thought, like, I wonder if she would be like a good solo gamer, because you really do have that luxury of time to just kind of like consider things and think about things and spin things out in your head. And there's no pressure. There's no one by you saying, hey, what you doing there? Like,
Exactly.
what's going on? Hey, you got to do something soon? Or my family has a nice little song that we sing to each other. It's called the "I'm Getting Older" song, where, my son will occasionally sing it, or I'll sing it to him. It's "I'm getting older, waiting for you." And so, like, when you're in a social kind of more setting with other people, you have to take those things into consideration, because it becomes clear that people might get a little irritated with you. Like, if you're taking too long, you don't have that pressure in this kind of game. And that can be very enjoyable. Like, that can be probably one of my favorite things about solo gaming. So if I'm looking at games like that, like you mentioned Pathfinder, or in some ways I even think of Netrunner. Now, I know Netrunner's not a solo game, it's a two-player game, but like the amount of time that I'll sit like just looking at cards and thinking about, like, what could I put here? Or the last time I played, this is what happened to me. So what can I do about that? And you just have that luxury of time. You don't have to make a decision right away. There's no pressure. And that's one of the things I think that can be great about solo gaming. So I appreciate you sharing that perspective, because that time thing, and then of course you bring up the whole first world problem that we have of, like, I've got to look at a game and review it, and then everybody out there listening is like, yeah, shut up.
Yeah, and what I've found is when I have kind of my AP issues when I'm doing solo games, it actually makes me not have AP issues when I'm playing with other people, because I'm so cognizant of other people in the room that I try to just go, hey, let's just take our turns and see what happens. And I think another aspect of that, though, is because, and I'm sure this is true for you too, as someone who looks at a lot of rule books, I know all the levers and stuff that I need to pull really well. I don't know what they do yet. I just know that they do something, and I want to pull them, and everyone else is going, wait, what's the lever again? And so they're just trying to figure out which levers there are to pull. And so I tend to be the person that sings the Getting Older song. So it is nice then to kind of retreat and go, you know what, I'm going to be the AP guy. I'm going to take my time making my decisions. And so it helps me kind of cultivate some patience that I probably need to bring back into my social gaming. So
yeah, that's probably a good point for all of us. Yeah. Okay, let's kind of circle back to the game. One of the things you talked about are scenarios. Yeah.
Yes.
So what can you tell me about the scenarios, and what can you tell me about maybe things that are your favorites or that you particularly like or enjoy? What would you say to people about that?
Well, the first couple scenarios are probably the ones you're going to play multiple times, just because they're the easy to medium difficulties. The first scenario is, they say it's the easiest scenario, which doesn't mean that it's actually easy to win. It just means that it's short.
Right.
And then the second scenario is really the one where you get at least a whole time period that you're kind of dealing with. It's a more epic game. I think it has 45 cards in it, as opposed to the 18 that are in the first scenario. So it's pretty significant change. And then from there, you just kind of ramp up and you play through different historical situations. The one that tends to make me happiest when I play it, and I mean that, of course, in a kind of a dark way, is the rope thrower, the Kit Carson one, where you're kind of walking through that whole progression of the story. And the way that this works mechanically is there are different historical cards, like I kind of alluded to this earlier, that you're going to split up and then take your common deck, which consists of operation cards and ceremony cards, and you're just going to divvy that up into equal piles. And so as you work through each pile, you'll eventually get to the first historical movement, which triggers victory point check, and then it kind of creates different conditions that change the game. And then after you play through the next few cards, you're going to hit another one and another until you finally trigger that final event. In the rope thrower, it's Kit Carson, and he actually, the only text on his card is, go to this place in the rule book and look up this giant block of text that is now what you have to obey as you continue playing the game, to determine whether or not you win. So that's how the scenarios work. They're almost 5 different stories that you can kind of walk through, and they increase in difficulty as you move through them.
And what's one of the things that I liked was that, that whole notion of the escalation of the game and the sort of unfolding of the game, as you kind of got more comfortable with the systems. Like, I must have played that introductory scenario like 4 times before I even tried the second scenario. Like, it took that long for me to kind of wrap my mind around it. And I'm usually pretty good at picking up games fairly quickly, but this one was a little obtuse. But once I got it. And I was kind of fully invested and bought into it. And so the different scenarios, like you said, are fascinating because of the different historical kind of situations and periods that you're going to be able to explore. And to me, I love that kind of thing about this game and other games like it, because there's a lot of game in the box then. Just when you think you've kind of got a handle on something, and you've kind of explored it, and there's more there, but you're hungry for something different, then there's something there for you. And so I think it's important that people understand that there's those different scenarios. You're not just going to be doing the same thing. You're not playing the same game each time. So thanks for outlining those for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we've spent a good amount of time, we've talked about the history a little bit behind the game. We've talked about the mechanisms, rather you've talked about them and described them so well. We've talked about the art, the board. We've talked about scenarios. We've talked about some barriers to the game, some things that, people need to be aware of if they're thinking about approaching this one. It's not as easy as some other games that I picked up, but it's definitely, as you said, it was one that is well worth the investment in time and energy to kind of really dive into and explore. You would agree, yes?
Absolutely, yes.
So is there anything else about this game that you would like to kind of talk about or, cover before we kind of think about wrapping up our conversation about Navajo Wars?
Yeah, I think the final thought that I would just kind of throw out there is, this game is going to constantly be in the conversation of, is this a game? Is it an activity, or is it a simulation, right? That constant conversation of, is this really a game, so to speak? And what I want to say is it's all 3 of those things, and depending on where you're at in what stage of it, it's going to feel different. So sometimes it feels like a game when I'm doing all the different kind of steps to methodically move through a phase, right? That is a game. And do I win or lose? That's kind of part of the game. But at the same time, it's a simulation. Like I said, there's some stuff in there that I think, wow, this really convolutes it. But it's a simulation in a lot of ways of this historical period, and so you can't leave those things out. And it's an activity. This is something that I value, not because I can check it off my list of things to do, but because I'm actually learning and growing and changing. It's a learning activity. And so if you kind of go into it with that mentality, and don't think of it just like, I'm playing this like I would play Pandemic, then I think what you expect out of it will change, and therefore kind of the opinion that you come out of that experience with will be more positive than negative.
Well, that's definitely sage advice, because it is definitely in that class of games that you mentioned that is, I think about some of Phil Eklund's games. These are also games that, people have these discussions. Is it a game or is it a simulation? And I've never quite understood exactly why those two things have to be mutually exclusive. And I think that you really said it and summarized how that doesn't have to be the case very, very well there, that you're going to hit on all three of those cylinders at different points during the game. And so as long as you're not going into it with the expectation that it's going to be all of this or all of that, I think it will definitely be something that you'll find to be as intriguing as I did and as intriguing as you did. This is a game that I played quite a bit when I first got it. And it kind of sat languishing on my shelf, I admit, for quite a while. I heard you make reference, even if I only play it once a year, I'm going to keep this one. And I did decide to let mine go. I had an auction not too long ago, and I did decide to move it along just because I haven't had that time to play it. And there are so many people out there I knew who were looking for it, waiting to see if there's going to be a reprint. And I was like, you know what? It had a lot. My decision to let the game go had a lot to do with what you just said, which is this is an opportunity, I think, for people to really kind of immerse themselves in this topic and this subject matter. And as a teacher and as a person who does cover some Native American history with my students, I want to give somebody else the opportunity to check that out, because there's just such a lot that can be gleaned from playing this little game in this little box from GMT. Joel has done just such an amazing job of designing something that does all the things you said. It's going to teach you, it's going to give you, you're going to have an emotional response to it, and you're going to have fun mentally trying to kind of figure out the systems of the game and how to do it, how to hang in there, how to survive, how to respond to problems. And so I totally wholeheartedly agree with you that this is definitely a game that people should check out. So I want to thank you for taking the time, for being patient, and waiting for us to finally be able to get this put together. And I also want to kind of say out there, to you, you're like the second or third person now that I've talked to that has been kind enough to say, hey, I listened to the show, and, I was kind of waiting for you to do an episode about this game, or waiting for you to do an episode about that game. And I really appreciate the fact that you kind of were like, well, why not me?
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you reaching out, because I need people who have more expertise than I do with the game to really be able to kind of do the game justice. As you said, I play games quite a bit before I talk about them or review them, but never usually to the mastery of the people that I have on. And so I'm kind of like always happy when people reach out and say, hey, can I talk about this game? And I want to encourage others to do that, because I think it's a great way to kind of spread the word about games that people find really exceptional or special, because no one at the rate that games are coming out can possibly cover them all. There's just no way you can do it. And so, I rely on the generosity of people who listen to say, hey, why not me? I'm going to write it, and I'm going to say, hey, let's talk about this game. So I want to thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. And I would say if anyone out there is skeptical about whether or not they can do it, even though they're very passionate about a game, I would definitely encourage you to give it a shot, because taking the time to really sit down and think about what exactly do I want to say about this game so that other people can hear how great I think it is, being able to sit down and think through that and then verbalize it is just a great exercise to practice. And so I just thank you for creating a context where people can actually have an outlet to do that kind of thing. I think it's a wonderful benefit to the hobby.
Well, thank you very much, Derek, and I wish you the best of luck, and I'll be listening to your future endeavors, both on the Dice Tower and on the What Did You Play This Week podcast thing. Did I get that right?
Oh, you nailed it.
Yes. All right. Good. Yes. So anyway, I want to say thanks again. And to everybody out there listening, thanks for tuning in, and have a great night.